About 3 years ago, I used to work in an antique store in our town, right at the corner of the market, owned by Mr. Shin. The owner of the antique store had a massive collection of all kinds of antique items in his store. It wasn't just his business. It was his passion, too. He lived in the upper story of the building with his wife and spent most of his time with his antiques. He was quite an interesting man, I must say. At that time, I was broke and looking for part-time jobs, and I remember he was the one who helped me out. I really owe him for saving me back then. Soon, we developed a good relationship. Sometimes, even his wife would come, and the three of us would talk for hours. I admired his personality and the way he took care of things in his store. He even had a hobby of collecting dolls. He had dozens of dolls of all kinds. Then everything changed when he bought that ventriloquist doll. It seemed quite old, and, to be honest, very creepy. From the very first moment, it didn't give me good vibes. It had big blue eyes that always seemed to be staring at me, shoulder-length curly hair, and a sinister smile that was just plain ugly. Anyone would get nightmares from seeing that doll. I don't know what Mr. Shin saw in it that he bought it. Not any normal person would dare to buy such a thing, but he wasn't an ordinary man. But after that day, his behavior changed. He would spend most of his time talking to that doll, asking it one-sided questions. It even had a name now, Harry. At first, I thought maybe that's just how he treated his new dolls, whoever came into his collection. But no, that wasn't the case. A few days later, Mrs. Shin came to me and told me something is wrong with her husband. She told me that he spent all of his time in the store, and when she came downstairs at night to check on him, she found him talking to the doll. She had asked him many times to get rid of it or stop spending time with it, but he would get aggressive. She was worried, and so was I, because his behavior had changed drastically. He wasn't the same old Mr. Shin anymore. He had become possessive and aggressive. It seemed like he had changed into a completely different person. Mrs. Shin and I believed it was all because of that doll. So, we decided to hide it when he wasn't there. I hid it in a cabinet in the store. When Mr. Shine returned, he started looking for his doll and calling out for it. After searching for a while and not finding it, he started asking us where it was. But we didn't tell him. Suddenly, something came over him. He became so aggressive that he started destroying things in the store while searching for that doll. I can't even describe it. He looked so horrible, as if he was possessed. He had no idea what he was doing. He was breaking most of his precious things that he had spent so much time and money on. He cared about his stuff the most, and now he was just destroying it for the doll. It was crazy. In the end, I told him where I hid it to stop him. He ran to the cabinet, took out the doll, and hugged it. He kept saying, "Don't worry, baby. Daddy is here, and Daddy will save you from the bad people, always." After that, he took the doll and went to eat with it. It really scared Mrs. Shin. Mrs. Shin even called a Chinese psychic. In the evening, the psychic arrived with different spells written on rectangular papers in Chinese. She placed them in specific directions, lit some incense, and started chanting something in Chinese. It was some kind of ritual. She called it a cleansing ritual that would expel the bad entity from the store and their house automatically. But instead of that, something really bad happened. Everything in the house started moving. The antique store items began falling on their own, and then Mr. Shin arrived. He started screaming at her to stop and grab the papers with the spells, trying to halt the ritual. I tried to intervene, but he threw me away. That was my last day at that store. I quit my job and decided not to get involved with that entity anymore. A few days later, I found out that Mr. Shin was getting a divorce. It was clear he wasn't sane anymore. How was Mrs. Shin supposed to live with him? And then, after a month, Mr. Shin committed suicide. Sometimes I pass by that now closed antique store, with the windows covered with newspapers, but I always avoid looking inside for fear of seeing that doll still there. A year ago, an unsettling incident occurred. I was out with my daughter, Anna. It happened to be her 8th birthday, and my sole intent was to bring joy to her special day. Following a delightful dinner, we made a spontaneous stop at a big toy store on our way to buy a birthday present for Anna. The clock had already struck 8 in the evening, and the store seemed unusually quiet. Anna, fascinated by the doll section, took the lead as we wandered through the different aisles of the store. We were on the lookout for her favorite toys as we explored. She pointed to one particular doll that was about 3 feet tall and dressed all in black. Her dress, hair, even lips, everything was black. There was something strange about that doll that was attracting us towards it, maybe because it was the last of its kind, present at the store. There was no other similar to her there. Anna also liked the doll, so we happily bought it and took it home with us. Everything started after that. Something strange happened to me. The next morning, I went to Anna's room and took her to the bathroom for her bath. While I was giving her a bath, I heard Anna's voice from behind, asking for food. When I looked again, there was that doll in the bathtub. I was shocked. I was quite sure that I took Anna with me, but how did she switch with the doll? I understood nothing, and at first thought it must be because of work overload. But things only got worse. Such incidents started to happen more and more often. I began to confuse Anna with that doll. I would feed her, sing lullabies to her, and play with her. But then after some time, I realized that I was attending to that doll. Sometimes I would hear Anna's giggles or footsteps, and when I looked around to see, I found that doll lying on the floor facing me. At that time, I really thought I was losing my mind. Its dark gothic theme had started to send chills down my spine, and it looked more and more terrifying to me. So, one day I decided to lock it away in the cupboard and tried to focus on my work. But everything became even more complicated. The lights started to turn on and off, the doors opened and closed on their own, things fell off the shelves, and the lights started to flicker. I even heard someone's screams, as if someone was screaming in anger. I became really scared. It was then that I realized everything happening was not just my imagination, but there was actually something really wrong happening, something associated with that doll. Terrified, I grabbed Anna's hand tightly and led her out of the house. The unsettling feeling that something evil had taken over the entire house lingered, making it even more urgent to escape its haunting grip. When I was finally out of the house, fear was evident on my face. As I looked at Anna, I realized that I was not holding her hand, but that doll. My heart stopped beating. All this time, I was saving that doll, while Anna was still inside the house with crazy things happening. I threw that doll away in fear and kicked its face out of frustration. I rushed back inside the home to find Anna. I scanned the whole house, but she was nowhere to be found. I called out her name when I heard someone crying. It was Anna, and the voice was coming from my room. I ran to investigate, and the sound was coming from inside the cupboard where I had locked the doll. I quickly unlocked and opened it. There was Anna, sitting with her knees to her chest, tears streaming down her face. I hugged her tightly, trying to comfort her. Surprisingly, the house was back to its normal state. Not even a single thing was out of place. When I went back outside the house, the doll was no longer where I had thrown it earlier. I tried to look for it, but couldn't find it anywhere. God knows why it left on its own, and what that entity wanted. But thankfully, it didn't hurt any of us. I never saw it again after that incident.
Subscribe to the channel to hear the strangest stories of encounters with the unknown. I'll tell you the best tales of horror, mystery, and suspense. When whispers and shadows lurk in the darkness, the time for nightmares has come.
Every kid loves to play with dolls, especially girls, but for me, it became the biggest nightmare of my life that still haunts me to this day. I was just a kid when it happened. I remember I went on vacation with my parents, On our way back home, I realized that I had left my most favorite doll behind. The whole way home, I couldn't stop thinking about it, longing for my doll. Mom and Dad were telling me that they would get me a new doll, just like my favorite one. Suddenly, our car stopped with a jerk. Dad got out to check, and it turned out our tire was punctured. It was midnight, and we were on an empty road surrounded by dense woods. It was a dangerous area. Dad started changing the tire while Mom held the flashlight for him. They clearly instructed me not to get out of the car, but then I heard someone calling my name. "Lily, come here." I didn't want to go, but for some reason, I was drawn to that voice. It was as if my body was moving on its own. When I snapped out of it, I realized I was in the woods, away from the main road. I got scared and started looking around to find the way back, but I couldn't. That's when I saw them. 2 glowing eyes, staring straight into mine. I started screaming and crying loudly. Dad came and hugged me. Tension was clear on his face. He thought something bad had happened, or I had seen something dangerous. He asked me what happened, and I told him that I saw someone there. He torch moved, the torch he had around to check, but there was nothing there except for a stuffed toy doll. It was quite dirty, with long golden hair, and wearing a blue dress with a blue hat. It wasn't bad looking, except for those red eyes. Dad rushed me back to the car where Mom was waiting for us, and she was relieved to see both of us. The tire was changed, and we headed home. That night, as I was about to sleep, I felt like someone was staring at me from the window. It was those similar eyes I saw earlier. I got scared and pulled the blanket over my head. When I woke up the next morning, I found the doll lying next to me. My parents scolded me for bringing home that dirty doll from the forest, but I hadn't brought her. I found it disconcerting, but after that, I started spending most of my time with that doll. I even cut off all my friends and stopped talking to them at school, making that doll my only friend. I even distanced myself from my parents. All I wanted was to be with that doll all the time until one day, the doll mysteriously disappeared. That's all I remembered. Years later, my dad told me the whole story. He explained how I had started talking to the doll. Both Mom and Dad noticed the change in my behavior and knew that something was wrong. Most of the time when they entered the room, they would find me conversing with the doll or pleading with it to stop. They also heard another voice coming from my room, and upon investigation, they found no one but that doll. They grew suspicious and also felt the presence in the house. One day, Dad approached me and asked me to spill everything, promising that nothing bad would occur. I resisted, saying I couldn't because something awful might happen, but he persisted. So reluctantly, I confessed that the doll was speaking to me, asking to be its only friend, and warning that it would be furious if I told anyone. He believed me and disposed of the doll. He threw it in the trash. But the next day, that doll appeared in my room again. Confused, my dad decided to burn it. He burned it in the backyard, but the next day, they found it again in my room, but this time burned and deformed. After that incident, Dad called the priest from the nearby church. He came to our house and gave me a charm to wear, telling me never to take it off, and took that doll with them. Since then, I've never bought another doll in my life. I'm scared of dolls, and that was the reason. I don't know why it called me and chased me. I never saw it again, but sometimes I still feel as if it's calling me.